follow up on it. I myself got a letter, and I haven't yet had time to do the research and figure it out, but I'm going to. It's really important that we all understand what it is and what our exposure has been.
Could you explain it to the public? I don't know what it is.
Well, I'm not sure I'm the best person to do the justice to it. I didn't bring the I don't have the exact information, but apparently there's a very, very good explanation online. And if you go online to Equifax breach settlement, you will. It depends upon what they consider your level of loss and what you can show. But probably everyone may be eligible for free credit monitoring and for a certain period of time, like a couple of years. So I would go on the website and check in your own situation.
And I think what people may not, I mean, most people probably are, but some people may not be aware that Equifax is one of 3 consumer credit rating companies that give each individual a number, a permanent but moving number representing their credit history. And that could have huge impacts on your life if you want to borrow or do any number of other things.
That's correct. I'm sorry I didn't say that.
Rent property.
I assumed a level of knowledge that I guess I shouldn't, but there are 3. There's Equifax, TransUnion, and I'm forgetting the third one, the tripartite of credit monitoring.
And the rest of us haven't gotten to. So.
And Equifax has been sued because there was a breach in their data system, and their data was compromised.
So in September of 2017, Equifax had a data breach where personal information was exposed. It affected 147 million people. And
That's about half of the population.
what was that? Social Security, date of birth, name, mailing address, the most important of personal information was exposed. And the company has accepted some liability for that. And there were some services that had been made available. And that's what Ms. Heller was speaking about. But if you were affected, you should have received a letter. If you don't recall if you received a letter, go to the website that Ms. Heller was talking about.
And you could also, there's a number there, and you can call them. If you give them your Social Security number, they'll tell you if you're affected.
Okay. Next. Item 3A on our agenda, question of approving a settlement agreement and change order number 32 for the Coolidge Corner School, now known as the Ferrita Ruffin Ridley School. I guess it's effective as of the vote in town meeting. Project contract between the town.
I think it's actually effective
When the
September
Attorney
1,
General-
2020.
Okay, so not immediately, but
Yeah.
looking forward.
I just want to point, are we going past public comment? I don't know that there are any members of the public.
Oh, I'm sorry, did I miss that? Oh, I apologize. Anyone want to make public comment? Ms. Frawley? I apologize. I'm still recovering from our birthday.
I'm sorry?
I'm still recovering from our birthday
I'm still
celebration.
recovering from lack of sleep for all those nights. Regina Frawley, a town meeting member from Precinct 16, as well as Russet Road specifically. As you recall, there was a question of granting a cosmetic road paving on Russet Road, which is a street of 3 blocks. That's all it is, 3 short blocks. And I rose to challenge it, and you put it on delay for 1 week. I challenged it on the basis that so many trees have fallen on those 3 blocks that there's a substructure issue. I think it's gas, but either way, there's something wrong that's going on my street. And I asked you to consider having the gas pipes changed, as completely replaced, as well as the water mains, which are cast iron, and many people have the connections are made at the same time to their homes, and many people are now replacing those. Having said that, the following week, the commissioner of the DPW disagreed strongly, and you did grant the contract. Within 24 hours, another tree fell on Russet Road. I don't know what communication you have with your department heads, so let me fill you in. They have now hired, and after that tree fell, not so much my complaining about it, but apparently the tree falling so swiftly after you granted that contract. They hired an outside consultant who came in and looked at the trees, again, 3 short blocks, and decided 13 more have to come down. So they're putting off the street repaving until the spring because of the weather, presumably. But I'm asking you to get involved and say, no, there's something wrong here. And we have received a letter from the DPW saying something's wrong, something in the substructure is wrong. I would like those pipes replaced for the full safety of the remaining trees. Just to give you a sense of how many have come down, my block, one of the 3, my short block had 20 oaks 20 years ago. 20 beautiful oaks. It now has 4. That gives you a perspective of how bad this has been. I urge you to take the action. Perhaps Mr. Kleckner can lead this charge if your decision-making is such that it should be to protect people. We're holding another public session. Unfortunately, the first public session was on town meeting night, so all the town meeting members couldn't be in 2 places at once. But I had a very productive negotiation with Erin Galantine, and we agreed for her to start that process. And apparently 7 of my neighbors showed up, and nobody objected to the removal of the trees. So they were looking for any objections. So far, none. They have carried it over to, I believe it's December 9th, and out of gracious concession to me, we'll hold it in South Brookline, the DPW garage, so that more people can probably get to it with less traffic across town. So it would be wonderful if we got feedback from you folks as to whether or not you will increase the digging. From what Mr. Papister, they have to go down deeper, I don't know how much deeper, and get the pipes replaced the way you have on Beverly Road. Because there's a school on Beverly Road, you did replace those when you did the road about 8 or 9 years ago. We're asking the same thing here. It's so evident something's wrong, so evident, and as you are the public safety commissioners, so I hope you will decide to do that, first of all, and secondly, please communicate with me as the go-to person on my street for any updates at all. Thank you very much.
Mr. Kleckner, can you look into that and report to the board as to what's going on?
I'm sorry?
I asked the town administrator to look into
Thank you very much.
your information and report back to us.
I'll just add briefly, I did see the report on the trees that were being, and it was quite remarkable, the number of trees that are going down there. I mean, I'm not an arborist, and I certainly don't work for a gas company, so I can't speak to all the reasons why that might be happening, but clearly something is very wrong on Russet Road and needs to be addressed.
Okay, now, question of approving a settlement agreement and change order number 32 for the Coolidge Corner School project, contract between the town of Brookline and Shawmut Design and Construction in the amount of $898,155. Mr. Gigley.
Good evening, Tony Quigley with the Building Department. Experian the third?
Yes.
Experian?
That's it.
Experience.
In any event, this is, as you stated, change order number 32. It is a collection of allowances adjustments to the contract, changes in scope, and some credit items for a net total of $898,155.01. Has been reviewed by the architect and recommended for approval. And it goes along with the proposed settlement agreement that has been shared with you also, which has been approved by both documents have been approved by the Building Commission and School Committee. And what this is this is the culmination of a lot of discussions between representatives of the Building Commission and the contractor over a period of probably a year or more. And this is where we have wound up. And as you can see, if approved, it has a summary of the remaining work to be done and at the school to be followed up on over the next few months.
Good. Any questions?
Where are we in the overall budget?
If this is approved, we are still somewhat below the budget as approved by town meeting, as the money has been appropriated by town meeting.
So this
So that-
doesn't, this doesn't force us into a deficit situation?
No,
Okay.
I don't anticipate any such
And
scenario.
are there things that still need to be done?
Yes, as you can see, there's a list of, the biggest things are, we had some issues with the new rubber flooring, and they're going to make those repairs over the next 3 school breaks, including the winter break, February and April break, and that's one of the biggies. The other is the raised crosswalk at, near where the the basketball courts are, that needs to be rebuilt. And I believe that's gonna happen next week, pending the weather. And then there's a few other little odds and ends on the list that they need to get finished up.
Okay, any other questions? No? Move approval of a settlement agreement and change order number 32 for the Cleveland Corner School, Coolidge, I said Cleveland Corner, Coolidge Corner School project in the amount of $898,155. All in favor, Mr. Franco?
Aye.
Ms. Heller?
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton?
Aye.
Ms. Fernandez?
Aye.
Chair votes aye.
Thank you very
Okay.
much.
Okay, Mr. Masick next. Question of approving a change order amendment approval in the amount of $19,556,005 with Skanska Construction for the following work to perform in connection with the high school expansion project. The STEM wing, miscellaneous metals, Cypress Electrical, Cypress HVAC, Cypress Plumbing, Cypress Fire Protection, Cypress Masonry. And Cypress refers to the new 9th grade wing on Cypress Street. Mr. Masick.
Yes, Ray Masek with the Building Department. This represents an amendment and represents 6 filed sub-trade bids. We continue to bid the project. To date, the procurement status of each of the different projects for Cypress, where we procured 64% of the project. For STEM, we're at 78%. For the MBTA, we're at 26%. And for the rest of the project, we are at 5%.
Okay, any questions?
Just what's
No.
the rest of the project?
We continue, right now, we're continuing to bid the smaller parts, well, there's one large piece, and that's the drywall. And we continue, and I'm seeing what's called requests to awards. For every piece that's bid, the contractor has to get 3 bidders and show us the bids for every single piece, for doors, hardware, garage doors, and whatnot. So we're hopeful that the entire project will be bid out by February.
Great, so those are those final touches.
The final touches, the
Yeah.
finishes. This represents, as you can see, the major mechanical, electrical, plumbing sub-trades. And then as we get into the finishes, you'll start seeing smaller and smaller pieces coming through.
And we heard at town meeting that bids are coming in higher. We're in an escalating construction cost environment. Are these bids that have come in so far, what we've awarded, in line with what we were expecting, or are we seeing that escalation here as
We
well.
are seeing an escalation. I will tell you, we were, on November 15th, we continue to do value management. We're continuing to look at the project. We're rethinking how we may do the tap-in project. It may still be a great project, but originally it was a full gut and reno, so we're rethinking the philosophy for that project. We're looking at finishes. We're looking at casework for the science rooms. And so we continue to do value management, but we're not ready to indicate where we are because we want to first see if we can bring the budget in and then tell you either we did it or we have bad news. But right now, it's not looking good for the
It's a
project.
very complex project, and it's got so many parts that we need to be able to analyze where we are. And I think that probably won't happen until January, February, when we can really pull the whole thing together. Right now, we're in the process of still getting in some bids, and some areas have come under. Most over, unfortunately, but some have come under.
I think that's totally fair. I'm just looking for an early indication about how things are coming in. So thank you for that early indication.
The early indication is, quite frankly, not good. And we are working very tirelessly to see where there's opportunities to bring the budget closer to what the voters expect of us.
Any other questions? No, seeing none. Question of approving a change order amendment approval in the amount of $19,556,005 with Skanska Construction. All in favor, Mr. Franco?
Aye.
Ms. Heller?
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton?
Aye.
Ms. Fernandez?
Aye.
And chair votes aye. Thank you. So, question of granting a temporary wine and malt beverages non-sale license to the Lars Anderson Auto Museum in connection with a fundraiser to be held on Thursday, December 5, 2019, from 5:30 p.m. to 10:30 p.m. at 15 Newton Street. Anyone have any questions? I see the police have granted an okay, and they have tips and crowd management in line.
The police have reviewed the application and see no reason to deny it, so.
So, move approval of granting a temporary wine and malt beverages on-sale license to the Lars Anderson Auto Museum for December 5th. All in favor, Mr. Franco?
Aye.
Ms. Heller?
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez?
Aye.
And chair votes aye. Next, question of approving the application of 8 Cypress Street LLC, doing business as Veggie Crust, holder of a common victualler license at 8 Cypress Street for a new entertainment license to include a television, I guess, inside, Monday through Sunday, 11 a.m. to 11 p.m.
Mr. Chair, could I just comment on this? As we have a new licensing employee, as you know, I think you all know Tiffany, and she's doing a wonderful job. And one of the things she's doing, especially as we get closer to renewal, is finding if there's any discrepancies with the licenses. She has located a number, less than 10, but several restaurants that are very clearly having entertainment, but it's not on their license. So you'll see in the next couple of weeks her catching up with these before renewal time, and this is one of them. It's all indoors. It's been going on for whatever reason. We haven't seemed to have that on our license, so we just want to, we see this as a housekeeping matter, cleaning this up, and you'll see a few more next week.
Okay. Any questions? Police okay with that? As I recall, yes.
Yes, I
Yeah, they
think
are.
they're fine with it.
All in favor, Mr. Franco?
Aye.
Ms. Heller?
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton?
Aye.
Ms. Fernandez?
Aye.
And chair votes aye. Next, assessors. Question of authorizing the filling of a vacancy in the position of an assistant assessor/field appraiser. level GN10 in the Assessor's Department. Mr. McKay.
Could I mention before Mr. McCabe presents to the board, this is the first public meeting since he announced his retirement from municipal service. And I know we'll have other opportunities to meet with Mr. McCabe very soon, by the way, on our tax rate classification and matters. But I did want to formally acknowledge your decision to retire, Gary, and just let the board and the public know what a valuable employee he has been, not only in his career, but certainly the last 12 years as the Brookline's chief assessor. Gary is top in his field. We do not have to worry about the town's tax base and tax system. He does a marvelous job with that. Very confident. I'm going to certainly miss him, but I want to wish him well, and just wanted to take the opportunity to acknowledge that in a public setting.
Thank you, Mel, very much. I appreciate that. And I do, Gary McCabe, the Chief Assessor and Chairman of the Board of Assessors. I plan to see you next week for the tax classification hearing. We can dive into the tax base and the tax system and the tax levy and all those numbers that we'll see next week. But today, again, thank you. I have decided to retire from government service after not only working here in Brookline for the last 12 years, and I very much appreciated the opportunity to work here, to be here. I have a lot of good things to say and will continue to say about the town of Brookline. But I also had previous experience at the State Revenue Department and with the city of Worcester. So I've added up the years and the age, and it's time to move on. A colleague just recently says, well, sometimes there's a need for a new pace and new space, and that's kind of how I view it. I'm not going very far. I'll be in the area and available to assist in any way that makes sense for me to do that. So again, thank you all, Mel and the entire board. The boards I've worked with before over the years, and my board, the Board of Assessors. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. It's been a very good experience, so thank you. I'm here tonight on another matter, however, although it's related. One of our assistant assessors, a gentleman named Peter Brown, is also retiring at the end of this calendar year. In fact, Peter was my first hire after I was appointed chief assessor here back in 2007, and he's proven to be an exemplary employee for this town. Peter's moving on as well. In fact, I think he's moving out of state, which I don't plan on doing. But the position that Peter holds currently with the town and soon to retire from is an assistant assessor, a field appraiser position. And I got to tell you, it's one of the most important positions in our office, if not the most important position. This assistant assessor goes into the homes of our taxpayers. So he becomes the face of not only our office, but to many people, the face of the town. And he's done that for 12 years. And I can tell you, in the 12 years, I think I've had 2 complaints about his conduct, and those are just communication problems. He goes to collect information about building permits and sales transactions and appeals, and talks to the homeowner and the taxpayer and learns about their property and their concerns. And he's done a great job at that. I think it's a critical position. I'd like to fill that position, so I'm here tonight to seek your authorization to fill that assistant assessor position, to continue that role of daily inspections of properties. The data that Peter collected in this, hopefully his replacement will collect, is critical in the system, in the process of fairly assessing real estate, right? And the tax is based on the value, and the value is based on the quality of the data. So I talk often about the high degree of quality, or the good quality database that we have in this town. It's current, it's accurate, because of people like Peter. You have to go out there and collect that, verify it, change it. And with that is a level of transparency, right? So he shares our record with the owner and talks about it and says, do you agree, do you disagree? And then we put that data on our website for further comment and review. So I think it's a critical position in many ways, and I'd like to continue to have that position in the assessor's office, whether I'm here or not, right? I'd be happy to answer any questions about it.
Any questions? Then I move approval of filling the vacancy in the position of an assistant assessor, field appraiser in the assessor's department. All in favor, Mr. Franco?
Aye.
Ms. Heller?
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Thank you.
Thank you very much. See you
And
next week.
Congratulations on your retirement.
Thank you.
And I'll just say briefly, thank you, and also, as you consider your next steps, just know that we have a number of boards, committees, and commissions that could use a man of your talents. So feel free to come on back.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mr. Fernandez. Right.
So next, question approving the application of Happy Gen Bakery, LLC, doing business as Clear Flower Bakery, photo of a food vendor license at 178 Thorndike Street for an amendment to their entertainment license to include music to the exterior of their establishment. I take it people have read the materials on that. The question is, whether the music's going to impinge on the quiet of surrounding neighbors. And, they claim that it's going to be such low volume that it's not going to be heard across the street, but I guess that's an issue that we should ask about. And I guess the question is, have they discussed this new music system with their neighbors across the street?
I can't verify that.
So maybe,
I could verify that if you wanted to table it and take it up again.
what do people think? Make it conditional on verification that the neighbors have been consulted with? Or do you want to just table it?
Is there any other place in town that does this?
Oh, yeah, quite a few places have external music.
This one's a little different, it's right in the heart of the residential. It's a business that's surrounded, there aren't.
And it's a
one
strip
little-
shopping mall
There's
surrounded
one
by
little
them.
other store, basically, that's there, a laundromat and a convenience store, and Clear Flower. So, but on the other hand, it's only going till 8 o'clock. It's not a late night thing.
And it's a funny intersection in
Yeah.
that the curb to curb is pretty,
Yeah.
It's a
pretty
very
generous.
generous, big intersection. The
You know,
closest
Abbotsford,
abutter,
and then Thorndike, and then Lawton, and then,
Yep.
Will you be able to hear it from your house? I mean, you're right around the corner, right?
Yeah, right down the street. I don't know, but I will certainly let you know if we approve it and I do hear it. But I have not, no one has called me from the neighborhood to express a concern. Now, do they not know? I don't know. So it might be better to find out
Okay, do
first
you want to hold this?
whether,
or-
we have notified people and they don't have a concern about it. Most people love Clear Flower because, and certainly the smells are wonderful. But,
So do you want to hold this until we find out?
yeah,
What are we finding out if?
They contact
That
the
they've contacted the surrounding neighbors.
Yeah, I don't know that for sure.
So will someone contact Clear Flower and tell them?
I will.
To block their neighbors?
I will.
And report back to us as to what the results were?
Of course.
Okay. So put that off for a future date. Question of approving comments to the application that was submitted by New Kent Street LLC to the Mass Housing Finance Agency in accordance with Chapter 40B. 217 Kent Street, 40B project. Ms. Steinberg.
Yes, thank you. Allison Steinfeld, Planning Director. As you recall, last week you conducted a public hearing to hear comments on the proposal, and in response to your comments, I prepared a draft letter that's before you. I hope I captured your perspective on the project. I'm certainly prepared to make changes from until the 2nd, December 2nd, at which time the letter must be submitted to the state. As you can see, the letter acknowledges that this is an opportunity to expand our housing supply, There are clearly some issues that need to be addressed, and the letter raises a number of those. Most notably, it's a big building without significant or really any setbacks, and there are a number of other issues that we've raised, and standard requests for information to be submitted to the ZBA if and when it applies for a 40B comprehensive permit.
Yeah, I think there's some other comments about operational considerations, like how is the trash going to work, entrance and exit from the driveway, questions about, pedestrian passage, given the plan that we saw, concerns about landscaping and trees in the back adjacent to the MBTA, and then my personal addition about, given that part of the site is in floodplain, how does that work? So I think it's a comprehensive letter, and
Was your comment about trash removal incorporated?
it was.
Okay.
All the things I spoke about are in the letter now.
Good.
The only note I have about I raise the issue of safety of pedestrians and students in the area, kids, because it's so close to the school. So you say that the board will expect that the developer plan and schedule its construction activities to have minimal impact on the functioning of the school and safety of its students, their parents, and school staff. Well, that's certainly true, but what about the increase in traffic on Kent Street, and how does that affect the safety of the students? Because I think that street, already the neighbors are complaining about that street being so heavily utilized and not feeling all that safe. And this will just, add to it. Presumably there's going to be, upwards of 50 cars additional living right there.
Right. Well, I will certainly add that to the letter, and I can also assure you that during the comprehensive permit process, we have both a traffic analysis conducted by the developer and peer-reviewed, and as well as evaluated by our transportation and engineering department.
In these instances, is the developer responsible for or making a contribution to the town for things like a traffic light?
Not necessarily, particular under 40B. We've been fortunate in pushing developers quite extensively, so have been cases in which they have contributed mitigation, but it's a tough thing to do under 40B. But our ZBA has done an extraordinary job, and I can assure you it will push.
Well, yeah, I would hope so, because I do think that, the addition of these cars to the road is kind of really pushing the envelope here. And I'm worried that without at least a pedestrian operated light for the kids to cross, it's really going to be a very unsafe situation.
We will certainly look at that in conjunction with DPW as well.
I would just note that that the two concerns that we raise in the letter appear, at least in my view, to be a little bit contradictory, where we say we're concerned about the number of new cars that this will bring, but at the same time, we're saying that we're concerned there's not enough parking being provided. So I'm not quite sure which one it is. I'm not.
No, I don't think they're mutually exclusive, but.
Yeah, but the parking situation relates to keeping cars off the street, just up to some degree, and the traffic is a separate issue. But I mean, it's a heavily trafficked area now, and that's not, whatever we do or say is not going to change that. I mean, if there are traffic lights or other things that can be done at that intersection, either required of the developer if possible, or just the town doing it themselves, I think that would be well worth the effort, because that is a heavy corridor, incredibly heavy corridor, right into Longwood Medical Center. So. Any other questions? Ms. Hamilton?
I personally am not that concerned about the parking level. I actually was very surprised, like pleasantly surprised that they were not proposing an enormous amount of parking, because that does significantly contribute to traffic congestion. So I'm not sure that I'm comfortable with us chastising them about it in this letter.
I'd agree with that.
So does that mean you're taking out that reference to amount of parking?
If you instruct me to do so, I'll be happy to.
What do other people think? I think that's probably something
Well,
that should stay.
you know,
but-
I understand where you're coming from. But on the other hand, there may be people who want to live in this building who have to drive to work because they work in Brockton, or they work in Bridgewater, or they work in, you know, someplace outlying. So you know, and they may be eligible for the affordable units as well. So, you know, you just don't know the situation. And I think I don't know that we can control people's behavior by cutting the number of parking spaces.
Actually,
that
you
they-
can. That's exactly how you control
But,
behavior.
you know, the problem is, do they have alternate means? And if someone works in Brockton and they don't have any other way of getting there, or Dedham, or wherever it is, you know, so they don't accept the job because it's too far, and but what if it's the only job they can get? I mean, you know, there are these kinds of issues. And so I think
We're
we
not
do-
recommending no parking. So I think your concerns are addressed through the parking spaces that have been allocated for.
Except that to the extent that we don't provide parking, it's not as if they're not going to park their cars or get a car. They're going to park their cars in the heat island parking lots that we have around town.
Off-street parking is incredibly expensive.
I
You
know,
definitely
and
think
people pay
twice.
for it.
Yes, I do.
I do too.
Yep. So it is a cost-benefit analysis that I think we need to force more drivers to make.
Well, you know, that's saying that those drivers who are privileged to make that choice are doing it.
That's what I'm saying,
Yeah.
you know, they're not
Yeah.
always so able to make that choice because they need
It's-
the car for a bunch of reasons, and they can't afford to have the most expensive option, so if they need a parking space.
And yet,
I mean,
we also
it's a-
value pedestrian safety. And pedestrians are safest when there aren't as many cars on the road, especially parked cars on the street.
But that's true, but take that to the extreme, you know, it's become kind of ridiculous, but at any rate.
Yeah. I don't have the proposal in front of me. I would be uncomfortable with any project that doesn't at least acknowledge the parking ratios that we have in recent years for residential buildings, which certainly doesn't mean a one-for-one. I think recent trend is for lower, and I think we just need to have this building, this proposal, acknowledge where we are with transportation and the incremental steps we're trying to take to decrease the number of vehicles in town.
My understanding is that the transit overlay district that was approved by town meeting to reduce the parking minimums, reduced it to 0.7 per bedroom.
And this proposal is certainly within 1/2 mile of a public transit station, so.
Yes.
And as a reminder, warrant Article 15 will be discussed at next town meeting, which addresses the issue of maximum versus minimum,
For commercial parking.
specifically for commercial, but it'll be an interesting discussion.
Yes.
So maybe that sentence that talks about enough parking can be phrased as, the select board expects the developer to, you know, ensure that an appropriate amount of parking is provided, given, you know, the transportation demand. Do we have a transportation demand plan incorporated here? I guess not.
No, we will probably condition the permit, assuming it
Okay.
reaches that point,
Yeah.
on providing a TDM.
Any other comments?
Just if you could briefly, I know we have other business tonight, but if you could briefly just walk at least me and maybe others through next steps?
Sure. The first step is typically to meet with the planning department. something this developer did not do, but we're moving forward on that. They submit an application to the state, one of the 4 subsidizing agencies, for determination of eligibility. If they meet the basic requirements, the state subsidizing agency will issue a project eligibility letter. With that Pell in hand, they can apply to the town, specifically to the ZBA for a comprehensive permit. The town must open a hearing within 30 days, no matter what, even if we're at safe harbor or we're at 10%. And then once we open the hearing, we proceed through the process. Technically, it's 180 days. We've always gone beyond that with the consent of the developer, begrudgingly very often. But, and more often than not, well, the last 15 times, the ZBA has issued a comprehensive permit, generally with about 70 to 100 conditions. We engage peer reviewers paid for by the developer. We engage all municipal departments in reviewing the various proposals, from trash to traffic to parking. We've got it down to a good science. We're getting good at this, unfortunately. But this is our 16th Pell within the last 6 years. There are 2 more that we're aware of, and potentially a third.
And I see everything's really clearly laid out on your website too. When we go on the town website, I was able to, when we had Kent Street before us previously, I was able to sort of look back at the entire history and everything. So I think that's really helpful for folks to know if they're interested in learning more about the 40B projects. That's all on the website.
Right. Senior planner Maria Morelli has done an extraordinary job, both in doing the website and staffing most of the 40Bs.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Okay, the idea here is that we would approve me signing the letter, so that you don't have to be bothered with that. So I move that the Select Board approve the comments to the application that was submitted by New Kent Street LLC to Mass Housing with the amendments that we discussed tonight, and that the Board authorize the Chair to sign the letter as presented and edited for the Select Board. All in favor, Mr. Franco?
Aye.
Ms. Heller?
Aye.
Ms. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez?
Aye.
Chair votes aye. Thank you.
Thank you, and I will prepare the document and distribute it tomorrow with the change, track changes in case you have any other issues before the chair signs it.
Okay.
Thank you.
And it's due December 2nd,
December,
which is
that's
what,
actually an
Tuesday?
extension.
Okay, is that Monday or Tuesday?
Monday.
Okay, so I'm in town.
I tried for a longer one, but it's successful. Thank you.
Don't let us make any more edits. This letter.
Probably won't change anything anyway.
Change it 10 more times.
Okay, thank you.
So, this is a hearing, and we are right on time. How about that? Boards and commissions, the following, wait a minute, this is not a hearing, I'm sorry.
Interviews.
It's interviews. Following candidates for reappointment, appointment to the following boards and commissions will appear for interviews. Transportation Board, Hemant Bede, is that how you pronounce it? Bede, yeah, come on up. Good evening.
Good evening.
So introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about yourself and why you want to be on the Transportation Board.
Sure. So it's Hemant Bide. I am a recent relocation person back to Brookline. I used to live here after college, and I went to college at Babson College up in Wellesley. Lived here for a few years, and then I went down to New York for about 12 years. Recently moved back 2 years ago. Lived just north of Coolidge Corner, and Summit and Beacon is where I live. I'm a partner at PricewaterhouseCoopers, the advisory consulting for advisory and audit firm. Have 2 kids that go to the Coolidge Corner School in kindergarten and 3rd grade. And to be honest with you, we love Brookline. That was a reason we moved back into Brookline from New York and no other part of the city. It's changed a lot, but it's also stayed the same. And what's changed is the amount of new construction and the single-family homes becoming multiple-family homes, and everything that goes along with it, right? Traffic and just congestion when you come back from work, you actually notice it. But also, with the increase in traffic and the number of cars, it's taken in my view, it's taken a big hit on the safety and the neighborhood feel that we used to actually have when we lived in Brookline, especially in the Coolidge Corner neighborhood. And I walk my kids to school every day, and I've seen right outside, on the corner of Short Street and Summit Avenue, for example, or when you go down Atherton and Winchester Street, the propensity for car accidents and the dangerous driving, especially around school time in the morning, is extremely troubling, right? The incidents related to some of the public use of e-scooters, people just literally leave them wherever they want, toss them wherever they want. And if you look at a lot of what, when I was in New York, I did some studies with the school on transportation for kids that go back and forth. In New York City, as you can imagine, most kids walk to the schools they're zoned for, but then there are others that are a little further away. And if you look at it, it's faster. It was faster for kids to walk from home, even the kids that live almost a mile away from school, than it was for them to take the bus. And the buses were free because the school gave you a pass for the kids, and the bus was free. And the reason was there were no bus lanes, and then there was no dedicated bus lanes. There was no dedicated school traffic cops for the kids. They had to wait for hours, and you can imagine New York City, right turn, rush hour, everyone wants to get everywhere, and no one cares about anyone else, right? You see a lot of that actually happening in Brookline, despite Brookline being a very small town. If you come up Beacon Street at 4, between say 4:30 and 7 in the evening, there are times you could be stuck for 45 minutes getting from Fenway or Kenmore up to St. Mary's or Coolidge Corner. So traffic management, which is the other big issue, I think, from my perspective, I would love to be involved in trying to address some of those concerns. And then again, if you're going to go green, which we, in my view, should be advocating for a more green transportation environment, we have to think about incenting people to take the train, where it's faster for people to jump in a car because the train to go a mile takes 20 minutes because they have to wait for a car to take a left turn or a right turn or whatever the case may be. I think we need to solve some of those. Synchronization of lights, another big issue. All of this, if you look at the backlogs and the log jams that are created because of the traffic patterns that exist, specifically in certain times of the day, it all has a huge environmental impact, which then causes other issues and causes more transportation problems. So, as you can probably tell, I'm very passionate about trying to, work with a broader group to address some of these concerns, and that's the reason, I volunteered, and I would like to actually be on the board to help solve some of those concerns.
So, in terms of the safety issues around traffic, particularly along the Beacon Street corridor, you have any ideas, any suggestions that could be implemented by the Transportation Board?
So I have a couple, right? One is, and again, there's probably a lot more analysis that needs to go into it, but I'll just throw a few things out there. If you just look at, where, say, Beacon Street, Summit Avenue, Short Avenue, right? If you make certain aspects a one-way, it restricts the backlog that actually takes place for people turning right. Right, and there's no, you could actually do it in a different way. You could have a traffic pattern in a way where if someone needs to take a right, everything comes down there from Summit Avenue onto Beacon Street, but anyone that wants to take a right onto Summit Avenue from Beacon Street has to go up to Short Street after the lights and then take a right, where there's not a three-way intersection. So you could actually free up a lot of the traffic there. There's also the thought process around not allowing street parking during rush hours and make that, say, a right turn lane, for example. Yes, the town does probably give up some money from a parking fee perspective, from a revenue standpoint, but it eases a lot of that congestion that might take place. And look, this isn't something that hasn't been done in other cities before, right? Boston has. It says no parking from 4 to 7, for example. So things of that nature actually frees up the traffic that may need to turn one way or another. The other thing is, like, I think the enforcement, to be honest with you, on ride shares and, double parking and in some cases triple parking, but it ends up being what's supposed to be a 2 or 3 lane road ends up being a 1 lane road in the middle of rush hour. And the enforcement of that, I think, is very important. And you could do that on the higher volume corridors versus others, just to keep that traffic moving.
Any other questions? Ms. Hamilton, you're the transportation guru on the board.
What do you think of parking minimums?
In terms of...
Residential or commercial?
In terms of the time or the cost?
Either.
So I'm actually a fan of non-time, or parking not based on your spot 220, but based on your car for however long you plan it for. Because if I, just as an example, if I pay for 2 hours and I leave after an hour, someone comes in after me, the town actually makes more money by doing that as opposed to, I pay for 2 hours and leave, someone else comes and doesn't pay a dime, or whatever the case may be. So I'm a big fan of actually paying by car as opposed to spot. I don't know if I'm explaining that right, but I think you know what I'm talking about, right?
So traditionally, we've had a 1 car per bedroom requirement of all residential development.
Okay.
And that has meant that when you go to build something for a studio or a 1 bedroom, actually, I'm sorry, it was 2 cars per, I think, 1 bedroom and studio.
Okay.
So that was recently reduced, but it was a very long process to try to reduce that, and that's not even townwide. What are your thoughts specifically on how many cars do you think 1 bedroom generates?
I think it should be based on dwelling and not the size of the dwelling, to be honest with you. We have, for example, 4 bedrooms, and if you do a car per bedroom, legally we should have 4 parking spots, which I think it's counterproductive for the environment we're in. I honestly think it should be by dwelling, and it should be no more than 2 per dwelling. If you have, no, wait, are you talking about on-street or off-street parking? Sorry.
Off-street.
Off-street, so I think it should be no more than 2 per dwelling if that dwelling is more than 2 bedrooms. But if the dwelling is, say, 1 bedroom, then and it should be by square footage of the dwelling versus the number of bedrooms they have.
Interesting.
Because, you could have a house that has, 8 bedrooms, and then you do a car per bedroom, and you're allowed 8 cars, right? And just, and given everything that's going on with the construction here, what was maybe a 4-bedroom house is now, got renovated in 2 levels, and each level has 4 bedrooms, and suddenly went from 5 to 8, right? From a parking spot perspective. So I think it should be no more than 2 per dwelling, unless it's a single-family home, and then they can, it's on their property, so it's not a big deal.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
So the Transportation Board is one of the hardest working boards in town, and a site of frequent barbell conversations where you have folks at opposite ends advocating for completely opposite things. So some folks saying, I want a stop sign, other folks saying, no stop sign. Some people saying, this should be a no parking zone, other folks saying, to support the commercial areas, the businesses, we need a parking in this area. So can you just walk me through some strategies you might employ to find the compromise ground, thread the needle between neighborhood disagreements, and come out with a fair and equitable solution?
I think a lot of it is an analysis of walking paths and times of day. Mm-hmm. Also the traffic that actually, when you look at traffic, pedestrian traffic as well as vehicular traffic, that then warrants a discussion around stop signs, red lights, or just just a flashing light or something of that sort. The other thing is also the angles in which a lot of because Brookline is a lot hillier than people think, the angles at which a car would approach an intersection and the blind spot that actually creates So some of the analysis around that. I think you have to go through a multiple step process to be able to figure out what is appropriate. Now, it would be, I mean, I can tell you certain spots, what I would do in terms of a quick study to look at some of those patterns to come up with a proposed solution. But I think you'd have to look at that flow of pedestrian and vehicular traffic and look at, some of the approaches and the angles of those approaches to be able to understand that. I'd also look at, honestly, from a police perspective, some of the incidents that have taken place in some of those roads and intersections in question. I mean, I've personally seen, in the last 6 months, about 7 or 8 incidents where cars were going down a road, there was no stop sign, and the car had a blind spot and took a turn and bumped into one at the back. And whose fault is it? They couldn't really move forward to see it, but then they had to move forward enough to be on the road, and then they were in the way, right? So you'd have to do some of those studies, and I would actually start with the hillier parts where there is a restricted view of cars coming from a particular angle. But I would approach it from that perspective.
Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you. Any other questions? So we'll be voting on members of the Transportation Board at a later meeting, but thank you for your presence here and your application.
Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to speak to you guys about it.
Okay,
Thanks.
thank you. Corinne Gibbs, next. Hello.
Hi, good evening.
Introduce yourself to.
And I
to
prepared
us.
a few remarks, if that's okay, to supplement my application.
Sure.
To answer some of the questions I've heard so far. As you know, my name is Corinne Gibbs. I'm a professor of molecular and cellular biology. However, my views represent myself. I'm a homeowner and resident of Aspinwall Hill. I've lived in Brookline for about 10 years after moving back from the West Coast. I'm a parent of 2 children. I have a preschooler, and I have a child in the public schools of Brookline, K through 8 schools, who walks or bicycles to school or sometimes uses her scooter. On a typical month, I use a car, whether my own or a taxi. I use a bicycle, whether my own or Blue Bikes. I use the trains, scooters when they're actually available, and I use my feet. I move in and around Brookline, Boston, Cambridge, and Newton, often with my children, and I use all of the above modes. I go north and south, east and west. And quite frankly, in my humble opinion, I think the T-Board's role is primarily to support the town staff, the select board and the town meeting members in the decisions that they've made, to inform decisions made by the select board, by the transportation board, using data that's acquired in as unbiased way as possible, so whether that's directly acquiring it or using it from other towns that are comparable, and to consider the impacts of our choices today and for tomorrow. And so I just want to highlight before I answer your questions, that the UN today released a report saying that decision makers it's too late. Ben, I can see you're nodding. It's too late. We're too late. And so the United Nations is calling for drastic action. And I think that we here in Brookline are special in that we already are dealing with these issues. We've already started to think about the future. And that has to do with our transportation networks, how we get around, who's able to live here. Because transportation affects our health, it affects our climate, it affects our access to jobs, and our ability to live, I don't like the word just, to live lives whether or not you're rich or poor, whether you're a minority or you are a majority, whether you're able-bodied or not. I'm happy to answer questions.
Okay. So, first of all, the Transportation Board really is the decision maker. It's not the town staff. They have special powers, superpowers in the transportation area. But at any rate, so do you have any specific ideas? I know your husband's involved in one specific idea, but other than that, do you have any?
I am not my husband.
I know. I know.
I mean, let me be very clear. I am not my husband.
No, I know that, and what I meant by that is, don't talk about that project.
Don't talk about the Beacon Bridleway project, is what you're
right,
asking about. So I will be honest that when I first thought about the Transportation Board, and my first interface was actually with the Select Board, was over Babcock Street as a person who was bicycling. I have never experienced as much racial aggression and gender-based intimidation as when I move on my bicycle around town. People yell slurs to me. People accuse me of being a bad mother because I bicycle with my children. And so that is one of those things that I would think that it's just, We need to make the streets safer for all users. And I want to push back on this idea that I've heard in the zeitgeist, that we don't have enough space. We actually do have enough space. Our town was built before there were motor vehicles. There is space, we just have to learn to share it. And as a minority, I've learned that if you wait for the majority to let you have it, you never get it. And so the issues that I would go after, Bernard, I would go after how can we make it livable for people who cannot afford cars, who cannot afford to move their cars to electric cars. Electric cars cost almost $60,000, right? I want to also address issues for people like my children who are vulnerable users. I think children are a nice representation for people who are not able to move about as quickly and easily as an able-bodied person. So specifically, the issues that I'm most interested in are safe routes to school. How do we slow down the roads near schools through design rather than just stop signs? I'm interested in having our transportation network be that if you are a person who is visually different, you do not stick out as much as you need to and put yourself unsafely in harm's way. So what I mean, I can see the question. So for example, where I get yelled at a lot is on Beacon Street, not because of Bridal Way. Here's a different example. I get yelled a lot in the area, basically, when you look at St. Paul Street, going towards Commonwealth, where it's a sharrow in one direction and a bike lane in the other. Cars will yell at things to me if I'm on my bicycle. Get out of my way. They'll honk. They'll move their cars super close to you so that you feel like you're about to turn them over. Those are the kind of things that we need to think about. I would push back. I agree with the town that the Transportation Board is a decision maker, but it's informed by the professionals in the town staff who sit and take down the data. It's informed by the bylaws passed by town meeting, and it's informed by the will of the select board. So it's a decision maker, but it's not an isolated decision maker. It's integrated with the rest of the town.
Any other questions?
Hi. So you have a very impressive resume.
Thank you.
And it looks to me as if you do a lot of traveling, and I'm wondering how you would work that in with the heavy load of the Transportation Board.
I know. So this is a conversation that we have a lot in our family. So with two young
Okay.
children, and I agree.
All right.
Thank you to my wonderful spouse who's with the children currently. How I work through it is as I work through every board that I select. I do not put my name into something unless I know that I can commit to it. And so if you look at the things I'm committed to right now across the board, a lot of them finish up within the next 6 months. For travel that's already arranged, I would work with the Transportation Board to either be able to call in or I'd move the travel to better accommodate that. It's the nature of my job, is that I juggle a lot of
Yeah,
responsibilities.
I can see that.
And I think that the select board, I think Ms. Heller, you'd say that the select board's also a heavy lift, and you probably spend more time in town than you necessarily would like to do.
Yeah, well, it's true, but I don't travel as much as you do, clearly.
That's true, but I also work when I travel.
Yeah,
Thank you.
great.
And it is 11 meetings a year for the Transportation Board.
More
They
than
don't,
that. They frequently meet twice a month.
Right, so, but I'm
Once a
aware
month.
of the commitment that is necessary for being here, and I would not put my name in unless I would make that commitment. And if you reach out to any of the organizations which I've worked with, they will tell you that I make time to do it.
Great.
Luckily, we have a lot of help with our children and our family responsibilities.
And we can't shy away from putting people on our boards who are busy and, professionally.
No, I agree with that, but,
engaged,
yeah.
and especially someone with the background of Ms. Gibbs. So, anyway, any other questions?
how do you think a science background will help you as something as routine as a stop sign comes before the Transportation Board?
So my background is in data analysis and in analytical thinking. One part of my job is that I have to take in information that comes from, that has many different parameters. So what I study is self versus non-self recognition in bacteria. And you probably don't even care about this, but this is the organism that lives in your gut, and it causes urinary tract diseases. And so what we have to do is take information that is, has many different flexible factors, so parameters, and pull them together to make a story or to understand it. And so I do a lot of data specific, data analysis, so taking large data sets and having to parse those numbers into, and figure out from underneath those numbers what the underlying connection from one thing to another is. Another part of what I do is that we do a lot of strategic planning. So we take the information that we've learned, we communicate with those around us and ask for their opinions, and then we have to implement it and communicate it both written, orally, and sometimes visually. And so it's an analysis piece that I'll bring, it is the communication piece I'll bring, and quite frankly, it's a tough skin to criticism, where I get a lot of criticism from my colleagues, both good and bad.
Keep that tough skin. Any other questions?
I'll just say thank you, and for the applicants to come. I'm sitting here kind of quietly because I'm looking for answers to a couple questions, and I'm getting them. And those questions essentially are, as a member of the Transportation Board, I'll be an advocate for, and I think you've made very clear, both applicants have made very clear what they'll be advocating for. And the other one is really closely tied to Ben's question, which is, for me, my approach to decision making will be in understanding. I think that last question that Heather just asked spoke directly to it. So for the next applicants, just consider my questions asked, and feel free to answer them in your remarks. Thank you.
Okay, so we'll be voting on Transportation Board members at a future meeting. Thank you for your application, and thank you for talking to us.
Thank you for considering me. Have a good
Okay,
night.
Thank you. You must be Mitch Heineman. Of course you are, Mitch Heineman. So introduce yourself and tell us why you're interested in the Transportation Board.
Good evening. My name is Mitch Heineman. I've been a resident of Brookline for 18 years. This is my second time before you applying for this position. I first came to Brookline 35 years ago when I was a young environmental educator living on Thompson Island in Boston Harbor. And I was visiting my wife's grandparents in Coolidge Corner, and I fell in love with the neighborhood at the time. I grew up in New York City, on the suburban edge of New York City, where I enjoyed few of the advantages of being in the city and few of the advantages of truly being in the suburbs. And that was what I love about Brookline, is that we get the advantages of both. We're in the suburbs. I live on a beautiful, quiet street. Yet, today, I walked 4 miles downtown to go to work, and I took the trolley back here to get here. And that's what's great about Brookline. We're an enclave within the city. We have urban advantages as well as the advantages of the suburbs, that when I go to sleep at night, it's quiet, there's trees, until the morning when things start up. What I want to do is continue some of the things I've done in my work for the town in the past. I served on the Town Bicycle Advisory Committee. I was on the old Bicycle Advisory Committee before it got dissolved. I was the chairman of the Reformed Bicycle Committee when we reformed it in, I think, 2006. And I served on the Complete Streets Committee, Complete Streets Study Committee, which you folks authorized 4 years ago now. And when you ask what I want, I fall back to the preamble of that, of the Complete Streets vision, which John Bowman and I drafted, and just the opening sentence of it says, we want, or not the couple of paragraphs down, it says, we want convenient, inclusive, and safe access by people of all ages and abilities to all community destinations and activities by all forms of transportation. That's what I'm looking for the town. I want us to be able to have everyone be able to get to where they need to go, and in a wonderful place. Brookline's a fantastic place, but we've had a lot of, the talks here, the projects coming in. We're still growing, We're now the biggest, I think the second biggest town in New England by government status. I think only Greenwich, Connecticut has more people in a town. And of course, right, we can argue about whether we should stay a town or become a city. But the fact is, we're a town and we want to keep that character while still acknowledging that growth is going to happen. And in order to do that, I want to find ways to make our streets not become too congested and yet get everyone moving along to where they want to go and be able to enjoy it. What I contribute is I have energies, I have ideas, I have time. I'm an empty nester. When I first moved into my house, I had two elderly, my wife's grandparents were living with us, and I helped them age in place until they passed away living on Beale Street at the ages of 98 and 101 respectively. Today I have an elderly father who lives over in the senior housing on Beacon Street. He's with us every day. and I'm helping him age in place and watching him deal with the issues of mobility for an older person. I bring passion and a desire to make the town a better place, and I'm a civil engineer. I'm not a highway engineer per se, but I understand about finding solutions that work for my clients. I mostly work for towns and cities around New England, also around the world, in forging better solutions for stormwater, improving water quality in waterways, and reducing flooding. And just before I take questions, I listened to the questions you asked to the folks a couple of weeks ago, and one of the questions I think Bernard asked was, what's one thing you would do? And just idea popped in my head is that, I don't know, maybe it requires a special permission from the state, but as we think about moving forward, one of the things in the bicycling and pedestrian advocacy community is talking about crashes, not accidents, that when we have collisions happening, that they're not entirely accidents. There's design things that go into what causes an accident. And we talk about how important it is to change the vocabulary as the world moves forward today. And one thing that we might consider is changing the name of the board to the Mobility Board. In New York City, they're talking about making an active transportation department and a pedestrian department, or positions in those. And maybe it's time, not that there's anything wrong with the word transportation, but mobility has a connotation about getting people moving, and that's part of what we want to do as we move the town and society forward. Oh, also, one last thing, Corrine stole my thunder. I brought it with me. The emissions gap report that just came out. The summary findings are bleak. Countries collectively failed to stop the growth in global greenhouse gas emissions, meaning that deeper and faster cuts are now required. I studied geology as an undergraduate. We studied carbon emissions and everything at the time. We didn't realize quite how bad it was. I chose to make my career originally in energy efficiency before I moved into water. But, I think we all need to be energy scientists today, helping to figure out how to reduce our carbon emissions around the world.
Okay, what, you took away my questions. So I'm trying to come up with something on the fly. I'm not very good at that. So what are the hot button issues in your view facing the Transportation Board in the near future?
Well, I know certainly we've had the big issue over the last 6 months of the scooter trials, and where do we go with that intermediate form of mobility of people who are moving a bit faster than pedestrians, or a lot faster than pedestrians, a bit faster than cyclists, and yet are still vulnerable. That people on scooters, there's going to be more e-bike, there's going to be all kinds of small motorized vehicles, and how do we make the road safe for those groups? And justly, I heard a discussion earlier about, the scooters are all over the place. I spent a lot of time picking up those scooters, moving them off the sidewalk. But in general, we need to be finding a way to make a safe third mode of movement across the town and across all of the city. Whether that means making separated cycle tracks or just slowing speeds in places, we need to think about how to fit that growing class of intermediate vehicles onto the road. And those are, they're not as wonderful carbon-wise as pedestrians or cyclists, but a scooter uses a lot. I mean, we can have all the discussions about the life cycle cost and everything of emissions of them and all, but in general, it's going to be a future where there's a lot of e-bikes and e-scooters on the road.
So let me ask the same question, a slightly different question, sort of in the same neighborhood, but a different question. So you spent some time in the town in this sort of transportation environment, both on the Bicycle Advisory Committee and on the Complete Streets Committee. What's the one or two things that you've taken away from those experiences that you think would serve you well on the Transportation Board? And you can give a policy answer, a procedure answer, a practical answer. I leave it up to you. But what's that experience equipped you with to be really helpful going forward on the Transportation Board?
So frankly, I don't think serving on the Bicycle Advisory Committee mostly is an exercise in looking up and saying, oh, there's big things happening up there, and there's not a lot we can do about it here other than offer a few tidbits of advice to the Transportation Board. More significantly for me, I served for 10 years on the Town of Milton Conservation Commission, we met every 2 weeks for 3 hours a pop for years and years. There was a lot of development going on in Milton, and it has a lot of wetlands, and we needed to accommodate a lot of different opinions and a lot of warring neighbors over, build here, don't build here, stay off my property. And as a practicing engineer, I need to meet the needs of my clients, whether I agree with it or not. And, I understand that what I want isn't what everyone wants. What I live in a household, and other people in my household wouldn't dream of riding a bicycle, and I'm not going to convince them to ride a bicycle. And, my father-in-law drives his car to go everywhere, and he's going to continue driving his car to go everywhere, and that's the way he gets around. So I think I've learned, and the other thing about my personal experience, I don't go into it a lot, is I raised 2 special needs children. I'm also, I live in a multiracial family. Both my children are adopted from South America. I also live with currently 2 Mexican-American graduate students. But in any case, about my children, I've learned to understand how to negotiate and when to give in. I had extreme, just to give you an idea of what I dealt with as a parent, as a young parent. My daughter spent a year in the care of the Department of Social Services. She had very serious problems of inability to cope and just very poor affect and very volatile. She was extremely violent, and she had a very tough time in Brookline schools, but she also got tremendous care from Brookline schools. And raising her was a challenge, and she's now doing wonderfully and incredible. So I can be very strong-willed and strongly minded, but I also understand there's other people out there, and that my opinion isn't always, I ran for town meeting twice and failed. I'm not that great at convincing other people of my opinions, but I'm a good listener. I like to study what the situation is, and I'd like the opportunity to serve.
Any other questions?
What can we learn from the study of water that might be applicable to transportation?
So the first answer whenever anyone asks about the study of water is it goes downhill unless you throw a lot of money at it, then we can send it back uphill. I haven't figured out yet how that fits in with transportation since I hadn't thought about this question. But, in general, what we've done with water over the last century in this country is bury it, put it out of sight, out of mind. And over the last few years, we've now been designing green infrastructure to try to bring things back to mimic natural systems. And similarly, when Corinne was talking about, Brookline was here back when we had horses and buggies, and we then superimposed onto that existing infrastructure a bunch of cars, and we need to figure out how to move back towards a compromise where we're not going to make the cars go away, and there's a lot more people here today than there were 100 years ago, but there's ways we can engineer things. People are really smart. Engineers are really smart. We work really hard at finding solutions. That's what it means to be an engineer. Not to the great scientists or anything, but scientists are about finding the truth. Engineers are about finding solutions, and that's my job, is to work to find solutions.
Thank you.
Any other questions? So we're not going to vote tonight, but at a future meeting. Thank you for applying, and thank you for your interview. Okay.
I'm going to watch that back later.
That's good. So, Linda Olson-Pelkey. Introduce yourself to the possible 1 or 2 people in our TV audience who don't know
me
you.
yet? Good evening. It feels a little bit like being at the office on Christmas or something here tonight, us being here, but thank you for being here and doing this tonight. My name is Linda Olson-Pelkey. I am a town meeting member from Precinct 2. So you want me to answer the big question of what do I have to bring to the Transportation Board, and
Or why do you want to be on the
why do I want to be, really? I know, I asked myself that question today. But no, so as you know, I have a background in urban planning, and in my work life, I ended up kind of by chance working in transportation. So the beginning of that was doing analysis for communities. And as you've seen here, where we have peer review when a consultant submits a study. And I was a professional planner for communities in New Hampshire. I was a regional planner, and I was like a circuit rider. And communities would ask me, say, hey, look at this report and tell us if this is right. Does this make sense? Does it seem correct? And so I had to kind of learn how to, back engineer these studies. And so through that process, I learned how to read plans, how to analyze intersections, how to look at corridor impacts. And through that process of learning all that and calling the people who wrote the software, because I had a lot of questions, I ended up getting a job with the state of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts in the Central Transportation Planning staff. And that is a group that is the in-house consultants for the transportation agencies at the state. And there I did everything from intersection to corridor studies to travel demand modeling. And what you learn there is the systems approach. And so I sort of can't see, I did the land use forecasting also for our travel demand models. So I'm not an engineer, I'm a planner. But it made me sort of deep in my bones sort of understand the relationship between transportation and land use and what's possible and ways that it gets kind of destroyed. So I also served on the MBTA Route 66 bus improvement study that we did here. And I also, when I'm on the zoning overlay district subcommittees, study committees, I often focus on the public realm, which I see our streets and public ways and sidewalks as part of our public space. And I think it's an important way to look at it. You might remember I did parking day. Now, some people are like, oh, parking day is so silly, it's ridiculous, but I having experienced it several years, seeing our citizens just be thrilled by the fact that there's a park in the street, and experiencing that space as something other than a place to store a vehicle, I think it really opened up people's minds to what's possible. And preview of Warrant Article 31, which I helped co-author, it's about testing ideas. It's about trying new things and having people have different experiences and learning about what's possible that way. I think we learned a good lesson when we did the bike path on Beacon Street as a trial. It's much less scary, and yet everyone gets to see, is it going to work or not? And I think that's really a good way to go about things. I guess I'll speak to your question about the decision-making on the T-board. I'm a little less of a split the baby down the middle kind of person. I think that it's better to be, fact-based and listen well and try to make the best decision for the greatest amount of people, or perhaps it's a safety concern that overrides everything else. But I think it's that we have to have some accommodation for certain needs in one setting and accommodation for other needs in another setting, meaning that if you lose one of these decisions, maybe you win the next time. But I don't think it serves anybody's purpose to say we're going to try to do it halfway. We're going to only do it, this way. And I think it's better to try to find a solution that is more holistic for the overall system that you have in mind. I also think that in Brookline, we are sitting on a wealth of talent, and we have the 3 transportation advisory committees going now, and they're all doing great work, and they're feeding those ideas and that research up to the Transportation Board, and that's super valuable. I did spend some time today reading about the accessible pedestrian signals that the Pedestrian Advisory Committee has done an extensive study. And this is something that's vitally important for persons who are visually impaired. And it's not something that we, instantly think about as a sighted person, but the findings were pretty remarkable. So they said that 56 of our signalized intersections with pedestrian buttons do not have that audible feature. And they noted all sorts of other problems, like they're in the wrong place, and you can't find them, and you have to go over here to get to the crosswalk. But that kind of granular analysis we really need, and, you know, let's face it, our staff can't do it themselves. So it's really wonderful to see those committees up and functioning and working well. I do consider myself a disabled person. I don't have a mobility issue per se, although given my previous traumatic injuries, with those of you who know me know I have had those, and spent a lot of time with various forms of walkers, canes, boots on my feet, et cetera, et cetera. I know what it's like to get around, try to get around when you're not very steady on your feet, and when you're going to get really hurt if you fall. And that has given me a whole new perspective as well, and compassion for people who struggle with that. So in terms of our transportation system, I guess I would say my priorities are safety, equity, and access. And I do think we have a problem with the amount of vehicles, the size of the vehicles, the distractedness of the drivers of the vehicles. And it's a little bit like the rats in the maze. The more you cram in, the more aggressive people get. I've felt it walking around town. I feel much more threatened as a pedestrian now than I did 5 years ago. Absolutely. It's I've had a lot of close calls, and I'm a safe, aware person. I'm walking around making decisions about what's safe to do. So I think those are all things we need to work on. I think the Uber and Lyft question, and trying to find ways of designating drop-off pickup spots and things like that to try to manage that disruption that's caused with the double parking and the dropping everywhere, and trying to get right up to the door of every place. It's not really feasible, and it's not helping our congestion situation.
So you're not a split the baby down the middle type person. I assume that doesn't mean that you're not appreciative of the need to compromise many times.
No, I
especially on the
think
transportation
most
board.
of our decisions are probably going to be compromises, because with the infrastructure system that's in place, you can't really make big changes all at once. You have to do it incrementally. So if you get a little bit of something in one setting, and then you build on that. So it's not a my way or the highway. That's not my point of view at all. It's more that not wanting to compromise the integrity of a design or a solution in order to make a particular constituency pleased in the short term, and giving up that goal that you have for the long term in the process.
Any other questions?
So I've had the pleasure of working with Linda on several different, especially climate action initiatives. Very hard worker.
Thank you.
And I notice here that you are involved in an enormous amount of efforts in Brookline, all very worthy. So I guess my question to you would be, how do you carve out the time for this?
Yeah, well, I guess I just do. I am almost completed my term on the Community Foundation. I have one more year, and that is actually a time-consuming thing to do, and I love it. But so I see that kind of tapering off. I do choose to do my homework. I try to come prepared, and so that will take time outside of the meeting, as you guys know. But being the fact that it's one meeting a month gave me a little comfort, as our climate committee was, and with the subcommittee work, but
Yeah.
It got to be more. So
Well, I do know that recently the Transportation Board has had to have more than one meeting a month when the agenda was too long to be completed. And it's, and in fact, as a co-chair of the high school project, we needed to go before the Transportation Board, and there had to be a second meeting scheduled, and we left there at 11 o'clock at night, and they were still meeting. So, I mean, I know that the hours can be long and the workload heavy.
Yeah, I think that is going to be a little bit of a challenge, but personally, I would prefer to meet twice rather than meeting, having meetings like you guys have, your 8-hour meeting till you meet the dawn and all that. So that would be my preference. I did speak to Chris before I applied, and he told me that they would consider starting earlier, which I think would be a help for us.
They start at 7.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think if they started earlier, this is going to be a decision for the whole board, obviously, but that would be one way of helping, I think. But no, I think this is a very special interest of mine that I've had for a very long time, and so I, wanted to step forward when this opportunity presented itself.
Thank you.
Follow up. I have a different concern related to the same facts.
Okay.
And that is not so much I assume anyone that comes before us is aware of the commitment and is ready to make that commitment. I think my concern, and by the way, I'll start by saying, I think you're an important voice in this town. I think you've been thoughtful, and even when we haven't always agreed on stuff, I'm super supporting everything you're doing with town meeting right now, by the way, including the parking minimums to maximums on board. But I am concerned with certain voices dominating discourse within town, and I'm concerned because I think you could be great for this, but I'm also concerned that you're also part of the zoning bylaw committee and the select board's climate action committee. You've been on both for at least a decade, and in other committees, and so I just am concerned that your voice and town meeting, by the way, is well represented in town, and that there are opportunities here, particularly limited opportunities with this board, to bring new voices into our governance, and so I just feel like I should be, I don't know if there's anything I want you to respond to there, but just that's going into my thinking here.
Yeah, I understand what you're saying.
Yeah, and so I don't know if you would say, well, if I was on transportation board, I wouldn't do those other things. I think the answer, you probably wouldn't. You would continue to do these other things.
The thing is, actually, zoning bylaw committee, it has great potential, but honestly, we haven't met that much as Bernard and Ben, who are now co-chairing it, know. I think if we were to get
We met
really
the town
serious,
meeting review.
really serious about doing some really serious zoning work, then I would question this, but that's not what I'm seeing is happening. And also, the climate committee, I've enjoyed being on that a great deal, and we're questioning our future right now. We're trying to figure out what that looks like, because with the addition of our wonderful sustainability administrator, kind of everything changed, and the working groups, and it was good because we brought in all of the advocates into the climate discussion way beyond our committee, and that was a really good thing to have happen. So I don't see those two things as occupying my energy and time that much right now. Maybe that's going to change.
No, remember, that's not my concern.
Yeah.
That my concern is more a smaller number of voices dominating the discourse in Brookline, what I call the Brookline 500, like the 500 or so people that are involved in everything, including town meeting, our boards, committees, and commissions, et cetera. And one of my chief goals is to bring more people into our governance. And so that's where when I see that you have so many different roles within town, not to mention all of the other ones that are like ancillary to the town, but that's not our concern. That's where I start to say, well, isn't this an opportunity for us to bring a new voice in, because you're already doing great work for us, including on town meeting?
I think that my voice is different in all those different settings, and the transportation board is a very unique item. And I would also say that, I didn't mention this before, that of things we need to do, the TDM is huge, and it's about the employers. And they need to have a solution for their employees and not be taking up our public parking. That's a really big one. And in adjusting the meter fees, that's a role of the transportation board. That's something that's a great tool that we need to utilize more. So I think you're weighing someone with expertise and knowledge and deep knowledge of the town and how decisions are made, and versus bringing a new voice in. So, I can't answer that for you, but I do feel like I bring a lot to this particular skill set on this board.
I agree. I appreciate that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank
And
you.
we're not voting tonight, but we'll vote at a future meeting. Appreciate your application and coming
Okay, thank you.
forward.
Have a good night.
Thank you. Okay, next, we're going to actually vote on question of making appointments to the Committee on Diversity, Inclusion, and Community Relations. Are you going to run that?
Sure, I'll try to work through that. So we have a number of vacancies on the commission currently, and we have 2 applicants who the board has interviewed. We'd like to have more applicants, but at this time, we're getting a lot of pressure to make appointments and to fill out more of the slots on the commission. So we have 2 applicants that the board has interviewed, as I said, and more than 2 vacancies. And so I'd like to put these names forward. I'll do that one at a time. You can indicate your consent. Malcolm Doldren.
Aye.
Stephen Ladzinski.
Aye.
And there you go.
If I can just make one more, the listing here of members continues to show Bernard Green as the select board representative. If you'd like to start going back to those meetings again, you're well, okay. Otherwise, if we
You're
could
the
update the record
yeah.
to have my name on there, it'd be great.
And the
Yeah,
accurate chair.
Will do.
And, there are a lot of boards and commissions that need their web pages updated, and I understand that Devon is working on that tirelessly.
And just so we're clear, the chair is now Joan Lanecourt.
Okay, next, marijuana task force, or actually what we're calling the Marijuana Mitigation Advisory Committee. Ms. Hamilton, would you like to present the charge that we're going to be voting on tonight, discussing and then voting on tonight?
Sure, so we discussed this a few meetings ago, and then based on the discussion, comments that the chair has provided, and also the town administrator, let me just flip to it in my packet. So it is in our packets. Really, the only significant changes, we wanted consistency about what the ombudsman's title was going to be. And I think there was one change where the ombudsman is not the chair of the committee. I believe the select board member is the chair of the committee.
So would you like to
You're
just
talking
read
about
the?
the community impact coordinator
Yeah.
or is the ombudsman?
I think for the TV audience, and there are people looking in, it'd be good to just read the charge.
Oh,
And then
okay.
we can have discussion.
Sure. The Select Board hereby creates the Marijuana Mitigation Advisory Committee to advise the Community Impact Coordinator and the Select Board on the expenditure of community impact fees and the implementation of mitigation measures associated with the sale of recreational marijuana in Brookline. The committee shall consider and make recommendations on the expenditure of community impact funds in accordance with Mass General Law, something, 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 94G,
Chapter
3.
94D,
Thank
Section
you,
3D.
3D. On topics including parking and traffic, storefront marijuana retails operations, litter, enforcement of public consumption laws, enforcement of violations of bylaws and state law. The committee shall be made up of a select board member, town staff, residents, and business owners or nonprofit organization representatives. The community impact coordinator shall be the primary staff liaison to the committee and serve as an associate non-voting member. In addition, staff representatives from the following town departments shall serve as associate non-voting members of the committee: fire, police, public health, Transportation Division of the Department of Public Works, Sanitation Division of the Department of Public Works, Economic Development and Long-Term Planning Division of the Planning Department. Voting members of the committee shall consist of 3 residents or business owners or nonprofit organization representative from each neighborhood where a storefront retail marijuana license has been issued, as well as a select board member. In the event that more than 2 or more storefront retail marijuana licenses are issued to locations within the same neighborhood, said neighborhood's representation on the committee shall remain 3 individuals, each exercising 1 vote. Voting members of the committee shall serve 3-year staggered terms with 1 representative of each impacted neighborhoods term, expiring each year on a 3-year cycle. Any vacancy arising on the committee shall be filled in the same manner as the original appointment for the remainder of the unexpired term. The select board member shall serve as the committee's chair. The appointed study committee shall submit its initial written findings and recommendations to the select board no later than May 15th, 2020. Therefore, the committee shall annually submit a written report detailing its discussions and activities to be included in the town's annual report. The committee shall also appear before the select board at least once per annum to update and advise the select board about matters consistent with its charge. This committee does not have the power to grant or deny license applications, as that power is vested in those town officials detailed in Article 5.7 of Brookline's bylaws.
Thank you, and I apologize for asking you to read the whole thing, but I do know that there are people who are listening in to our meeting on BIG and are interested in this item.
Yes.
So
I hope I didn't go too fast.
no, it was perfect. So the select board has also received some questions about this committee, or I have received questions about this committee. I think most of you have been copied on them, maybe some have not. And here are some answers to some of the questions that have come up that I've seen. First of all, asking about filing an application for the committee. An application should be filed with the select board, and application forms can be found on the town's website at the boards and commissions web page. It will be the select board who will decide who to select for the committee from the community member applicants. We've also been asked about oversight of the committee.
Let me just say, and applications are open.
And applications
We're
are
accepting
open.
applications,
Yeah,
so
right.
if you're interested, please apply.
Select board, we were asked who provides oversight to the committee, and that will be the select board providing oversight of the committee. The committee will be advisory to the community impact coordinator and the select board, and the select board will make the final decisions on any recommendations of the committee. And then responsive to Mr. Franco's information, notice of the opening of applications to this committee will be given by publication in the tab, posting on the town's website, sending to people who have signed up for Notify Me, social media sites, and this and previous announcements at the select board. So that's how we're going to get out the word. And as Mr. Franco said, applications are welcome right now. So go to our webpage and submit them if you're interested. Any further questions or comments about the charge before
Well,
we
I
vote?
just want to make it clear, some people were asking me whether the committee would, the residents on the committee would only be from the impacted neighborhoods. And I don't think that's correct, according to this charge. Furthermore, there may be people who live on the border of one of those neighborhoods who go to work in those neighborhoods, or, I think it's very difficult to limit the geographical area from any particular resident. In addition, right, while we only have we have one operating facility and one about to operate facility, we will have, who knows when, more facilities perhaps in a different precinct or a nearby precinct. I think it is tough to limit the residents of the place where people live in terms of their residency and service on this committee.
I mean, the original idea was that this would be a mitigation committee and would address issues that were arising within the neighborhoods where licenses had been issued. So, we can talk about changing that, but I think it's appropriate, given the nature of this committee, to limit the members to those neighborhoods that are actually impacted by cannabis establishments. I mean, that's up for discussion, but I mean, that's where we
In fact,
originally
it's
think.
Well,
my
I'm not saying that we wouldn't limit it to the neighborhoods, but the point that I'm making is that there may be residents who live on, I'm trying to think of an example.
Or South Brookline, South Brookline would be an example.
Well, I'm thinking, you know, people who live in, or people who live in South Brookline but work in Brookline Village. You know, they're impacted theoretically in terms of, and they understand the impacts because they're there. Or people who go through that neighborhood every single day. Or people who live on Linden Street. It's not that close to the village, but it's pretty close. You know, you're not gonna, you know, are they part of the village area? That's what I'm asking you.
Okay.
This doesn't say that we're going to be limiting the applications of people to those neighborhoods.
It
I think it does.
Where
yeah.
does it say that?
Voting members of the committee shall consist of 3 residents or business owners or nonprofit organization representative from each neighborhood where a storefront retail marijuana license has been issued, as well as a select board member.
Okay, but I'm asking you, how are you going to define the neighborhoods, you know?
Well, I think that, you know, is flexible. I mean, for example, your example of Linden Place or Linden Street, you know, we can say that, well, that's close enough, and there are people who have come forward with concerns or issues. So, but, you know, I think the idea of having someone from, let's say, Deep South Brookline probably is not appropriate, because that really takes away a position that someone, you know, directly impacted by a cannabis store in Brookline Village, for example, would otherwise have.
Okay, so then another question I have, I didn't follow this, I was looking at the previous paragraph, but this paragraph, so theoretically, since we're going to have 4 marijuana, that's what our maximum is, are we going to end up with 12 residents?
No, I think it says not, it'd be 9, right?
Well, potentially, it really depends on what happens to the 2
All right.
Exactly.
applications at Commonwealth.
Yeah. So I mean,
So if one of them falls through, then potentially, you know, they could go after another area in town that town meeting approved.
right.
And I'll just say that there's likely to be some art to this. I mean, I imagine we wouldn't want 3 of the representatives for the Brookline Village area to all be living on Walnut Street, for instance. We might want somebody on White Place or somewhere else. Imagine we wouldn't want 2 people who live in the same home to be 2 of the members on this committee. So I think we'll get the applications, and then it's going to be a little bit of art putting this together in a way that feels fair to folks and make sure that the people who are most impacted by the shop and the other shop being there are represented.
It's yeah, I mean, I'm sorry to interrupt. It's a matter of context, and I hate to paraphrase Potter Stewart, I'll know the right applicants when I see them. So, you know, I think, I admit that neighborhood is not defined. I can't come up with, as I sit here, a better way to define it. I wouldn't want to artificially draw a circle around a storefront.
I agree with you,
Yeah.
that's what I'm saying, that this is very nebulous, and it's not,
Well, that's the art of it.
I think, yeah.
And it is the 5 of us that will appoint this committee. So we will have a robust discussion in open session.
Probably way too robust.
Can I ask a question? I found that this has been helpful when doing a call for applications. Do you have a sense yet of when this committee will meet? Will it be weekday mornings, weekday evenings, or have you not?
I mean, that's really up to the committee, isn't it? You know, they'll
Sure,
assess-
and
they'll
the
assess
way you're
who's on the
looking at me,
committee.
you're making the assumption that I'm the select board.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I guess we'll have
the
to figure
committee
that
will have
out.
to be formed, and they'll look at their schedules and you know, their priorities and figure out when is a good time to be meeting. I don't think we can.
Yeah, I do think, I mean, it depends on the membership and when they're available. I do think it's important for this group, perhaps more than any other group in town, to meet at a time when it's convenient for residents. And balancing schedule availability with when folks who live in these neighborhoods or with an interest in the topic are available. It's a bit of an art. I wouldn't want to artificially say at this point, thou shalt meet, at 8 AM, or thou shalt meet at 6 PM, I think.
Right.
And we
No,
have
I
a
mean,
lot of staff people who we have to
Yes.
also juggle, and
That
that's
too.
going to be
Yeah.
difficult.
Right. I'll just say I agree with that. It's just I think there may be people who apply and then we say you'd be great, and then a time is set and may not be able to make it, and we may need to
Yeah.
sort of go
Yep.
down to the.
We've encountered
list.
this challenge with the Land Bank Study Committee, and what I have used is a doodle, and every single month is taken kind of on its own.
Got it. Okay. But I won't look at you. I don't know who's taking on this charge.
I move to adopt the charge for the Marijuana Mitigation Advisory Committee.
There's I think just some grammatical cleanups that are
Okay.
necessary, so I'd be comfortable voting for it with the understanding that we're going to go in and just tweak some of the,
Okay, non-substantive.
As I was reading it, I was like, wait a minute, that's not plural.
And can I ask just one thing, and I don't want to throw a wrench in this, and it's not actually my concern, but I feel like it's come up on this board before, is the use of the word marijuana versus cannabis. And
Yeah.
are we okay with using marijuana? There's some nice alliteration there, or do we feel like we should be using the term cannabis instead?
I like using the word cannabis, but maybe I'm wrong. I've always believed that cannabis had somewhat of a racial connotation, or marijuana had a sort of racial connotation, linking it to Mexican and other Latin American peoples. But, I mean, that's just me. I mean, whatever people's, I mean, marijuana is a word we use sort of in casual talk, so.
I don't know what the answer is. I need to be educated about the connotations of marijuana versus cannabis.
I'm happy to change it. I have no preference.
I mean, the Cannabis Control Commission uses the word cannabis. I mean, maybe
Okay.
that,
Seems like that's maybe the
Consistency.
better word to use.
Okay.
Yeah.
so it'll be the Cannabis Committee.
So any place that marijuana appears, we'll replace it with cannabis, and then there's some other grammatical cleanup things that we'll do. Okay.
Okay. So I move approval, any other discussion? Okay. I move approval of the charge for the Cannabis Mitigation Advisory Committee with such non-substantive edits and changes as are made subsequent to the vote by Ms. Hamilton with the input from other members of the board. All in favor, Mr. Franco?
Aye.
Ms. Heller?
I'll vote aye, but I am
You
concerned
can vote
about.
abstain.
I'll abstain.
Okay, I didn't mean
I'm
to switch.
concerned, I'm really concerned about we're not, we're saying 3 residents or 3 business owners, or, I mean, is it 1 resident owner, 1 business owner, 1 nonprofit? I mean, I think there's some language cleanups that could
We'll
help.
figure that out when we get applications. Ms. Hamilton?
Aye.
Mr. Fernandez?
Aye.
And chair votes aye. Seeing no other business before us on this agenda, I adjourn the meeting. Thank you. And it's 8:10 or 8:12. Wow.
What will I do with the rest?